gentlemen, Alex Anderson and Ricky Tim.
Welcome. This is great.
We don't know whether to say good morning or good afternoon or good evening.
I guess it depends what kind of person you are. I'm a morning person, so good morning.
Right, and the reason we say that's because if you're watching this on the internet, you could be watching it any time of the day. Remember the days that you had to either set your VCR
Oh, yeah.
or be there to watch a show?
I remember the days I could set my VCR.
Boy, communications has been wonderful and changing. But you know what? There's a form of communication that hasn't changed, and it's wonderful and timeless, and that is magazines.
We love our quilt magazines, don't we?
You love your quilt magazines? Yeah, absolutely.
What about newspapers?
And newspapers, you know, before the magazines, before quilt magazines,
Right.
I know that like the Kansas City Star newspaper would have quilt patterns in there for quilters. But there was a kind of a dry spell, and there wasn't a lot of print material available to quilters. But the Quilters Newsletter magazine
Oh, it's been around.
is actually kind of the pioneering magazine for quilters. And I had an opportunity to go up to Golden, Colorado and visit with Quilters Newsletter magazine, and we're going to take a look at just my visit of going up there.
Great, let's look. Recently, Ricky had the opportunity to visit the home of Quilters Newsletter magazine. Now, you might think that creating a magazine for quilters is serious work. It is, but I think you'll soon see that working for Quilters Newsletter magazine would be just about any quilter's dream job. Meet Jan McGee, executive editor.
Quilters Newsletter got its start at the kitchen table of Bonnie Lehman. She had the help of all of her kids to get it out. Its birthday is also the birthday of Bonnie Lehman's youngest child.
Wow, did Jan just say Bonnie Lehman started the magazine on the same day she gave birth?
Its birthday is also the birthday of Bonnie Lehman's youngest child.
I guess so.
So that was quite a big day for her, and that all happened in 1969.
On the day Ricky was visiting, Jan and her art director, Kath Wright, were laying out the next issue.
I feel like I'm in the midst of making something great. So.
You are. Even though it's called Dummy Day.
Oh, okay. It's Dummy Day, everyone. Look who gets to be here.
That's a term in publishing where you actually lay out the pages so that from this point on, once we decide what goes where, we'll be able to then put page numbers on the book.
It's amazing to think that in this day of computer dependency, this process could be so basic. I wonder if this isn't their favorite part when they actually get to see their collective vision coming together. Jan reflects on why the magazine had such a successful start.
In 1969, we were creeping along toward the bicentennial. The idea of quilts and making quilts had disappeared from people's consciousness, and Bonnie reminded them that it was there, and it just filled a need for authentic kinds of folk craft.
In 1983, Bonnie also founded Quiltmaker magazine, and then in '94, they moved to their present location in Golden, Colorado. Currently, there are 10 people on staff at Quilters Newsletter, but there are at least another 10 people with CK Media, the parent company, who help cover the rest. The employees are not chosen for the fact they're good at grammar or graphic design.
For Quilters Newsletter, I insist that my people are quilters.
They have their own quilt laboratory with the newest fabric and tools available today. How lucky can that be?
Many things happen in here. Many magazines get designed.
You call this a job?
Yes.
This is awesome.
The facility has a photography studio. Prior to being photographed, the quilts hang in full view for the staff to enjoy.
These are antiques from a show, an exhibit that was first seen at the Road to California show on California gold quilts. This is California gold. It's a special fabric or fabric color that was used a lot around the time of the gold rush.
While the quilts for photography are in the nether regions out of view of the public eye, the reception area always has quilts on display. Look at this terrific exhibition of reproduction quilts. And if this isn't enough to make you want to apply for a job, possibly the best part might be that when someone has a new quilt top, everyone breaks to help baste it together. Now that's what I call lasting threads. I'll tell you what, Ricky, if they're taking applications, I might want to apply. I can remember my first Quilters newsletter magazine. It was newspaper print, and it had Jenny Beyer on the cover.
Oh, wow.
Jenny Beyer had to have been 15 at the time.
Okay.
You know, and since then, actually, as we're taping this, they have put together 392 issues. Imagine that.
That's incredible.
And imagine if you were Bonnie Lehman watching how your magazine has grown so beautifully, and to think that they have Quilt Maker magazine and a whole lot more.
Well, and also just to think of that work environment as a quilter. I mean, I said it was the dream job.
Was it really?
Oh,
Tell
my
us
word.
the dirt.
It was amazing to be there because they're all, you know, they're gelled as a team, but then they come together and here they're basting their quilt, and I'm thinking, this is a job? You've got to be kidding. The only strange thing about the whole day was I was there on dummy day.
I know. Usually that's me. But we do love Quilters Newsletter magazine. How many of you get it for a subscription? If you don't, that's your homework after today. And if you don't believe me, they've given us all to give you a copy of Quilters Newsletter magazine and Quilt Maker magazine. And if you would like to write them a thank you card, they're giving you stationery also. Talk about inspirational, watching something like that grow.
It is, and I found a lot of my inspiration for quilting in magazines, and now I find it in lots of places. And today's show is really going to be about the inspiration, how you get what's in here out, and really kind of finding that inner voice and letting it be a way to communicate who you are. I always talk about how that quilting ends up being a document of our life. And people will look at these quilts and they will know us by looking at our work. So it's just not the fabric, it's just not the construction, it's not just the tools, it's really the heart and soul behind the work. And that's what this show today is going to be about.
And so who's our guest?
Our guest today is Vikki Pignatelli. She's the author of Sacred Threads Show. And
Ricky, you promise that you're going to do something real special for this audience today.
I did. And I also need to go back and say she's not the author of Sacred Threads.
Oh,
she's the organizer of the quilt show called Sacred Threads, and she has a book that we'll talk about when we come back.
Sounds good.
Welcome back. We are today talking about inspiration and really what is the heart and soul behind our quilts.
Well, I'm inspired by your black hat.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You know, the hat is really an interesting icon. I've worn it so much, but it doesn't really work with the lights in a studio, so I have to keep taking it off.
All right.
Is that all right?
That's all right. I think I'll still recognize you, Ricky.
Yeah, it's back to the shiny bit.
Well, I am really excited about our guest today.
I'm excited as well. Here to help us kind of understand the inspiration behind our quilts is Vikki Pignatelli.
Welcome, Vikki. Welcome.
Good to see you. So, Vikki, tell me a little bit about your quilting experience. How did you start sewing?
Actually, I almost flunked out of home ec because of sewing.
Oh, really?
So the fact that I'm even doing quilting now is just unbelievable. I came about going back into quilting when my sister, who happens to live next door to me, dragged me to my first quilting class. And like almost all the other quilters I know, it became an obsession. And the rest is history.
We don't know about that, right?
No, nothing about, I'm totally obsessed with quilting.
Now you teach, right?
Yes, I do.
All
of
around
them.
the country, world, the whole bit?
Yes, I do.
What is your number one piece of advice for your students?
I think that my number one piece of advice would be to put their passion into their work. And to do work that they're passionate about. Because when you put your passion, your heart and your soul into your work, It makes it different. There's a tangible difference that anyone who sees it can readily sense. It's just a very unique piece. Your passion comes out into it.
It does come out. And you know, I know that you've not been quilting for very long. What, 1991?
Yes, that's my
area?
sister dragged me to that class in 91.
Right, and you know, you've risen up in the sort of ranks of teachers, and I have no doubt it's because you really put that passion into the lives of your students.
So would you say passion is what makes the difference, can make or break a quilt?
I think it makes it the best it can be.
Awesome.
Where do you find your passion?
Passion and inspiration can come from anywhere at any time. You have to listen to the voice within, and it has to come out. I think one of the things that you need to remember is to always be flexible and never have a preconceived idea of what you think a quilt should look like. You should listen to the voices in. The voices that come into your head, the only way that they can come to fruition into a work of art is through your hands. And if you pretty much stay out of the way and listen to the voices and just be there to make the quilt and let the quilt be and grow and do what it wants to be, it's going to be just something that you can't describe. It's awesome.
Well, above and beyond your quilts, equal to, I don't even know how to say this, you are the founder of Sacred Threads.
Yes, I am. Quite by accident. It wasn't anything I ever intended to do.
So how did that happen?
Actually, it came from something that was very discouraging. And I think it's always a great thing when you can take a discouragement or something negative and turn it into a positive. And you want to hear the story, how it happened?
I want to hear the story.
Actually, the reason that Sacred Threads exists today is because of my quilt, Creation of the Sun and Stars. And that quilt was a gift, an inspiration that came early one morning. And it was about 5:30, and I awoke, and the picture was there in my mind. And I started sketching it out, and by 8:30 that morning, it was complete, full size, ready to go.
Wow.
And it's by far my favorite quilt. Well, I had sent it to a major quilt show.
Which shall remain nameless.
Right.
And it came back with a horrible judging statement, all kinds of bad things about it. And I had total faith in this quilt. And as a veteran of these competitions, I knew better, but it still bothered me. And the next thing that happened is really scary from my point of view. It popped into my mind that I needed to start a show. And I'd never had any experience with this and had no idea how I would pull this off.
We know how this feels.
And I realized that there are quilt shows out there that deal with the art form and composition, and there are quilt shows that deal with workmanship. But there were no shows at that time, and this was 1999, that dealt with the emotional aspect of quilting. And as quilt makers, you know that we have days, weeks, months, sometimes years that we work on these projects. And all of our tears, our fears, our joys, our insecurities, everything, our happiness, all goes into this work. But no one ever looked at that, and no one ever searched for the meaning behind this.
It was all about color, composition, workmanship, and forget the message behind it. Really.
So this is the history of Sacred Threads.
This is a history.
Well, you've got beautiful quilts here I'd like to take a look at, and we'll start from the left, and then I'll work our way around.
Okay.
First one, what's the name of it?
That one's Resting Place. Mm-hmm. And I have a real soft spot in my heart for Colorado. And especially Rocky Mountain National Park. And every time I go to that park, whoever's with me literally drags me out of the park and kicking and screaming. And so when I decided to make this quilt, I realized that I couldn't be there physically all the time. So I always leave part of my spirit there. And so the transparent ribbons that you see going through that quilt.
That's your spirit.
That's my spirit that remains on that mountaintop, even though I'm not there.
Well, and the next quilt, it's a piece. It's nice. It's an art piece.
Yes, that is engulfed. And you won't believe this, but it's actually self-portrait.
Really?
It really is. We do carry such hectic schedules that I was feeling really burned out and overwhelmed at the time.
We don't know about that.
And I didn't realize that, and I so identify with trees. I have trees in a lot of my quilts. That is definitely a self-portrait.
So is it a burned out tree?
Basically, yes, but there's still life in it. There's still some color in it.
And it's going to come back.
Yes.
Oh, it is back.
It's back.
And then the next piece?
That's my creation of the sun and stars. And the yellow ribbons are the hands of the Creator coming from all parts of the universe and forming the sun. And as the sun is being born, it's spinning, it's throwing off fire, and that fire is turning into dancing, joyful stars.
Wow.
Wonderful.
That's beautiful.
And then the last piece?
That's the promise of spring. And it is a totally improvisational piece. And this is what I meant about taking a quilt and letting it take a life of its own. I only made, in one of the techniques I'll show you later, an oval block. And from that block, the whole quilt just kind of materialized. It just grew and it wouldn't stop.
Well, Vicki, I have to say that when I got my hands on your book, Quilting by Improvisation, and flipped through, I knew that you had to be on our show.
And the book has a lot of information and techniques in it. It's amazing.
But up next, you're going to show Ricky some of these techniques firsthand, right?
Yes, I am.
Great. Don't go anywhere. You won't want to miss this. So Ricky,
Yes, Alex?
you know when you get into the high-end machine, how there are two different spool holders?
I do, and actually, I don't know why there's two spool holders. I tend to put my thread in a cup, and I have a stick and a safety pin, and I bring it through, and it works. But I'm sure that that's not really the way you're supposed to do it.
Well, I always thought they were put there just for your own fancy.
Right.
Such is not the case.
Okay. So what are they for?
Okay, so the deal is I was doing the blanket stitch, and the blanket stitch on the Bernina is supposed to be the best out there, all right? But the stitch was really bad, and I'm like, oh man, what's going on with my machine? So I called the little girl at the quilt shop that owns it, and I said, okay, what's going on with my blanket stitch on my Bernina? And she said, what thread are you using? And I said, I'm using jeans thread, and jeans thread is a cross-wound wrap.
Okay. Now, what does that mean?
Okay, cross-wound is when it's put on the spool with kind of a crissy-cross like this,
Oh, okay.
all right? And she said, if you're going to use a cross-wound wrap, that's a mouthful.
It is. Say that
Put-
10 times.
Put it on the horizontal. I did it, the stitch was gorgeous. Now, you do have wraps that are stacked wraps.
Okay.
Superior often has stacked wraps.
Okay.
Just like stacked wraps should go on the vertical spool. So think of it like a chimney stack, up and
Okay.
down. Now, if your machine only has one spool holder, don't worry about it. It just kind of becomes an issue with the high-end machines with the, two
Where to
spools.
put it.
Yeah. Now,
But don't other people sometimes, if they don't have one or the other, they have accessories
absolutely.
for accomplishing that just as
Absolutely.
well?
This is just kind of like one of those FYIs.
Yeah.
Another FYI, you know how Superior is a site sponsor for us. Thank you,
Thank you, Superior.
Anyways, their spools are like really cool. It looks like an old-fashioned wooden spool, and these plastic, right? Well, the end pops off, and you can put the thread across when you're done for the day, close it, and then your thread drawer is in a big pigsty.
And it's not a rat's nest. That's what mine looks like all the time, so it stays nice and tidy. Well, that's a good tip.
Yeah, good stuff.
We're back with Vikki Pignatelli, the author of
Quilting by improvisation.
Quilting by Improvisation, and Vicki's going to share with us some of her techniques that she uses to get these wonderful, flowing, pieced curves.
Yes, actually, it's a combination of piecing and applique. It's so easy, anybody can do this.
Okay, why don't you give us a kind of how will we start this whole process?
Okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a simple improvisational pattern. Okay, very simple. We're going to take a square ruler and we're going to put it on a piece of drawing paper.
Okay, drawing paper, just regular drawing paper.
Just regular drawing paper. And we're going to make a square all the way around.
That's pretty simple.
Okay.
All right.
Then we're going to take a flex curve. Now this is a wonderful tool. It makes delightful curves.
These are found in local quilt shops?
Quilt shops, even like Office Max
Okay.
and that type of thing.
Okay.
Office Depot, that type of thing. And you can twist them and turn them and make all types of curves. And you can take a pencil and just trace those curves,
Wow.
just like that,
Beautiful and smooth.
all the way down.
Wow.
Okay,
And then,
this is what we end up with.
wow.
This is our pattern.
Very curvy. I love curves.
I love curves too, but you know what?
What?
I think we can make this better.
Okay, what can we do?
I think that we can make curves on all four sides to make a perimeter that's all curvy.
I don't know, you're stepping outside of those norms.
We're stretching the imagination.
I like that. You were
Okay.
talking earlier about not saying outside the box, so you're using stretching the imagination.
imagination.
Isn't that good?
So on all four sides, we'll just turn and make the curves that we want and trace all four sides.
All right, and when we're finished?
When we're finished, this is what we have. Now we have to ignore our square box.
That's hard to do for a lot of people, you realize.
I know, but now we have that new perimeter, and we need to extend all of the lines that we have to make a pattern.
So you draw those on out, and then do you erase the...
Let's erase that. We can erase the square and extend our lines on out.
All right. very
Okay?
good.
And then what we're going to do is we need to trace it on a piece of freezer paper.
Okay, and the freezer paper, for a lot of people that don't know, is actually purchasable at your local supermarket. Okay, easy. I should say people in the United States know about it a lot, but our worldwide audience, sometimes freezer paper can be a little bit difficult to find. Freezer paper has a flat, dull surface on one side, and it has a wax coating on the other side that enables you to iron it down.
And it will stick to the fabric, and you can use it as a template.
And it's very transparent.
Yes, it is. You can see right through it. And that will enable you to trace your master pattern onto the freezer paper on the dull side.
On the dull side.
On the dull side. And once we finish with that pattern and get it all traced, we need to put it on a foundation.
Okay, and what do you use for foundation?
Okay, for the foundation, I will use a piece of Pellon stabilizer. And this is just a regular or lightweight stabilizer. It's not fusible, not tear away, and it's just plain stabilizer. You can find it at major fabric stores.
Right, okay, so you've pinned your master pattern, well, it's not your master, this is your freezer paper.
This is my freezer paper.
Onto the Pellon.
Pin it securely, and we will start in one particular area and move down.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you number these?
Yes, I do. It makes it a little bit easier to remember. And I'm going to start here with piece number 1.
Okay.
And I'm going to cut it out. And all these lines that you see are the seam lines. So I'm going to start with piece number 1 and cut it entirely out on the seam line.
Okay, right, so that's the seam line, and here is the template cut out, and it has been...
It has been pressed to the right side of our fabric.
Oh, you don't have to work upside down?
No, you can actually work it on the right side of the fabric.
Right on the right side of the fabric.
And one of the things you have to remember is to leave a generous seam allowance all the way around on all sides.
You mean not a 1/4 inch seam?
This is a no rules quilting.
Wow.
No rules.
That's great.
Absolutely. No measuring. You don't have to measure any seam allowance.
Vicki, you and I are kindred spirits. I don't hardly do anything with 1/4 inch seams. And so this is another great process. No measuring, no 1/4 inch seams. You're my kind of gal.
And you know what? When you leave all that extra space, if you make a mistake, it's easy to fudge.
Oh, good.
You
That's
can-
good. That's good news. I like that.
Yes, it is.
So this has been cut out and ironed.
Okay, and then what will happen is once that's ironed, we're going to slip it right back into place,
So it's going to slide into place.
into the hole from where it
and
came out of.
Here is that sample.
Right, and once it is in place, you can remove that freezer paper,
Peel it off,
right?
revealing the fabric.
You need to see what you're doing at all times.
Okay,
Okay, and then pin it into place on that Pellon stabilizer.
right. So there it is. And then what do you do with the next piece?
Okay, now the next piece, we have raw edges under this piece number 2.
Right.
And that is why we have to turn under the seam allowance that's on this edge. So I've marked that with little arrows to indicate which edge needs to be
Which
turned
edge
under.
is going to be turned under? All right, so this piece gets cut out.
Right.
And we've got that same piece now ironed, as you had indicated, onto
The
piece of
right
fabric.
side
The
of
right
the
side of the
fabric.
fabric with generous seam allowance all the way around.
That's right.
And this edge with the arrows is the edge that's going to be
It's going to
turned
turn
under.
underneath.
Now, is it easy just to turn it under?
Well, there's one thing you have to do first, okay? If you notice on all curves, you have a convex or a concave.
I get those confused.
There's an easy way to remember it, okay? Remember mountains and valleys, especially in Colorado.
It's
That
easy
should
for
be
me to
easy.
remember. So a
That's right.
mountain and a valley, and how does that relate to
Okay,
turning it under?
when you have a valley, you need to clip the seams, the seam allowance, almost, but not quite, to that freezer paper edge. That's the guideline.
Okay.
You don't ever want to cut a mountain, but you always need to cut a valley seam allowance to get it to turn under smoothly.
Okay, so it is going to be turned under, and this is that same template again.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like there's no seam allowance, but it's been turned under and clipped.
And
So-
pressed with a hot steam iron. That keeps that crease nice and crisp.
Okay, so that's really good. And so this piece, then what do you do with that piece?
Then that gets put right back into the
It puts into place.
to the hole where it
Okay.
came out of,
Right.
and it just gets nudged right under the remaining pattern. And it also gets, let's see, let's get this
All
back.
right, sorry.
That's all right. If we take this away, we can remove the freezer paper.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And it will remove right like that.
So this, I didn't realize you had that piece
Yeah.
hidden under there.
There.
All right.
And it
So
removes.
there's that piece that we just did. It's under there, it's in place, and you can remove the freezer paper.
That's right.
And begin seeing the magic of the design
That's right.
emerge. Okay, great.
Okay. Now I'm going to tell you that you can do about, you construct about 6 or 7 templates before you need to sew it.
Okay.
That way, if you decide I don't like a particular color or a fabric, you have time to change it before you sew it down.
And it's not like paper piecing where you peel off segments of paper. That template can be reused because you can repress the freezer paper. and
Right. It will stay
restick.
sticky for about 6 times.
So when it's time to stitch, what's the process that you use for stitching?
Okay, now I like to use the machine blind hem stitch. Here is what this looks like. And you can see there's straight stitches and then little bites at about 3/8 of an inch intervals.
Right, and I see that your sample has them going to both the left and the right. Why
Yes.
would you need both of those?
That's the mirror image. It would depend on what side you need to use to actually sew down the patch that you're using.
So you set the foot in the center, and the bite goes over to the folded side or the pressed side of the fabric. Is
Right,
that
the
correct?
bite needs to be on the piece being sewn down.
Okay.
So it would run like this. You would have the straight stitches and the bite coming over and then coming back and running along the piece that's beneath it.
Okay, but I can see these stitches. Is that desirable or?
Well, if you wanted it to be, it could be,
Okay.
but this is a contrasting thread. If you desired, you could use a matching or blending thread. And then what happens?
This is stitched?
Yes.
Oh, I can hardly see. I didn't realize that. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So you used a matching thread or a blended thread on this area right here, and it looks like it's just perfectly pieced together.
Exactly.
And it's sort of not. It's sort of appliqued and pieced at the same time. What a
It's a
wonderful,
blend.
wonderful method.
And now we have all these machines that have these wonderful decorative stitches.
Absolutely. I remember whenever quilters were like, I just need a straight stitch. That's all I needed. Just give me a straight stitch because I got a 1/4 inch seam. That's all I want. But with the machines today, we've got all these wonderful decorative stitches. So you use those to stitch these down?
You can use those as well
Wow.
for any one of your projects. And imagine what you could do with a crazy quilt now that you know how to do curves.
Could use all 805,024 decorative stitches on my machine. That would be great.
And here's our finished quilt.
Oh, this is it. This is it. This is the same one that isn't this beautiful? Absolutely wonderful. Wow. With its fun, wavy edges.
It's unique because it's not square.
And nor are you. You're not square either, that's for sure. All right, now, tell me, I know we've done this with patterns, but you are talking about quilting improvisationally, still doing this kind of technique. Show us what you're talking about.
Well, we used an improvisational pattern on that, but now we're going to scrap the pattern.
Scrap the pattern.
We're going to scrap the pattern, and this time we're going to do it without a pattern.
Okay.
Okay? And the first thing we're going to do is use our trusty Pellon stabilizer.
All right, so we've got a square,
That's our foundation.
and you've put a piece of fabric in the middle and pinned it in place.
That's right. We're going to make a block. And I've just chosen I've cut a piece of fabric that's got 4 sides.
And I would say it's rough cut. It's not
Very rough
measured
cut.
or anything, right? All right.
Okay, then the next thing we're going to do is cut out strips of fabric that we can put down.
Okay.
And you can cut these again at random. You can just look at your piece of fabric and just cut as you wish.
Randomly cut it.
Randomly
and then if
cut.
you've got a valley, you clip
Clip it.
your curves, press it under, and then you can put that in place.
You need to turn under a seam allowance. And again, you don't measure anything. This is no
This
rules.
is great, as long as you cover up the edge below.
That's right.
And the same thing for the next piece?
Yes.
You cut a curve,
Yes, and you can
Turn-
even be inspired by a piece of fabric that has already been cut up for something.
it's already got a wiggly edge. You
Yes.
can just use that same wiggly edge, no waste.
No waste.
My granny would be proud.
Yes. Okay, here we have all 4 sides done. Now, the one thing that you need to remember about this particular technique, if you're going to make a block like this, you have to have a good value change. In
That
other words,
means
light
light.
and dark.
Okay, light, mediums,
Okay.
and darks, sure.
Or else your block won't be distinctive. It won't show up well.
Okay, so you've got a dark, you've surrounded it with
With
sort
lights.
of light. It's got a nice
It's a medium.
print. You're kind of doing a garden theme here.
Yes, I am.
And then back to
The dark.
some darks to give some distinction. Absolutely great.
Okay, here's our piece, our block that's already done, all
Look
surrounded.
at that, just and all improvisationally done.
Yes, it
And
is.
you can hardly even see those stitches that you're using to do that.
Now you can make about 4, 5, 6, however many blocks you want, and you can put them together to form a quilt.
The same way, bigger
same way.
pieces of fabric, turning under the edge and stitching them down.
That's right. Or you can keep it
amazing.
as a single block.
Look at the shape of
Yes.
that quilt.
What
That
you
is
need to do,
absolutely
be
spectacular.
inspired by the shape of the improvisational block that you put together, and then finish your quilt that way.
And okay, and finish the quilt.
Yes.
I'm looking at these edges and I'm seeing no bindings and no edges. So can you share with us now your method for
I
finishing
certainly
up
can.
these
I've got a
quilts?
trick up my sleeve for that, too.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go.
What we're going to do, we're going to finish with a faced binding.
A faced binding.
Yes,
okay.
we are. And I didn't do well in math either.
I didn't either.
So this is no measuring, and I use a whole cloth for several reasons. One is because it puts a nice even tension on all these wild curves and points that we have. For another reason is I don't have to measure anything.
Okay,
Okay?
excellent.
So what we're looking at here is the quilt face. This is a quilt top.
Okay, this is a quilt top. Just
Quilted,
imagine
sandwiched.
this is all pieced. This is a quilt top.
And
It's
it's
sandwiched
sandwiched.
together and it's quilted.
Now, down here, I have to come up with an outline, an outside perimeter for this.
Okay.
And I've made this freezer paper template just to show you what the outline's really going to look
Okay.
like, okay? Well, I will actually press this on with an iron to fuse it to the top, and then I'm going to machine baste all the way around the perimeter.
So you're stitching around the edge of the freezer paper, and whenever you do that, we can see
On the back side,
the stitching on the back side.
I know where I need to stitch.
Right, absolutely.
So what I'll do is remove the freezer paper then,
Remove the freezer paper.
and I will put the right side of my quilt top on the right side of my facing.
So we have you're facing, but also it is a facing.
It
It's
is
not
a
a backing.
facing.
It's
This is my
'cause We've already
backing.
got the backing, so this is a facing. All right, so you put that
Then
down.
I'll do our final stitch with the regular stitch all the way around the perimeter of my quilt back.
Okay, do you tuck in just a little way?
Just a tiny, so I don't have to take off those basting stitches. I'm always thinking.
Okay, and so after that's stitched down, then it's like it's all one piece.
That's right.
Now you've got to find a way to get in there.
That's
so-
right. You have to trim those seams. And it will help. You don't want any kind of a ridge, so it would help if you could grade them or kind of level them down.
Bevel them on the edges,
Yes.
I see.
And you also have to trim your seams, and remember to clip those valleys.
Clip the valleys, okay.
Okay.
And that, and then,
Then we're going to cut out the center of our facing. But the one thing to remember, Ricky, is that you never want to cut any closer than 2 to 3 inches from the seam.
okay, so you give a nice wide bite away from that. So we're just cutting out.
The entire center.
can see
And you
that.
can always, and I've used this method for even my big quilts.
Okay, now
So that leaves the entire.
I'm starting to figure it out. At this point, we're going to turn the whole thing inside
Right,
out. Is that
inside
correct?
out. And then use a little plastic corner to straighten up your seams.
Okay.
So that they're all nice and smooth and flat.
Oh, this looks great.
Now is the time when you can sculpt and have fun. You can cut your lines curvy, you can use little points in them, you can have a lot of fun. Then clip some curves if you need, and just turn under the seam allowance and pin it, and then whip stitch it together.
Put it right down and finish it up. That's a wonderful finishing technique. If you do not need to have a binding on a curvy edge, you've got
That's
it all
right.
finished out just great. All right, I know you got one more technique to share with us.
I just have to share my mitering technique. This is painless, and so many of us have problems with mitering.
It is. It is frustrating for a lot of people. I'm going to turn this around because I know this is the corner you're going to work with
Okay.
first.
The first thing, and this technique will work with any border or binding, and it doesn't matter if the border can be different angles, or even if a border is wider on one side than it is another.
Okay.
And what you have to do is use a ruler and take a fabric marking pencil and mark from the inside corner to the outside corner in a straight line.
Absolutely.
Okay. Then what you'll do is you'll take a pair of scissors and you will trim a seam allowance about a ½ an inch out.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So we've done that on this next corner. You've trimmed it.
With our seam allowance cut. And then what we'll do is actually turn it under on that marked line, and we have a perfect miter.
And you're going to use your
Blind hem
stitch
stitch.
to stitch that down.
Yes.
Oh,
Perfect every time, and visibly
and
you
flat.
can see it.
And flat, absolutely. And there's the finished one
Right
on
here.
this one. And it's a little different angle than the others, but you see how nice and flat that
And
is.
flat
That
it
is
works.
absolutely wonderful.
Perfect miters every time.
Wow. Let's look at some of your quilts.
One more thing.
What were you wanting to say?
There was one more left.
There's one more corner?
Yeah.
Oh, there's one more hoopy-doo.
Well, there's one more thing I wanted to say.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Well, you know what?
What?
Who said that this is no rules? Who said miters have to be straight?
Oh no, they don't have to be straight. Oh, that's right. You've got, oh, look at this.
We have curved
How
miters.
could I forget? Look at that. So instead of just folding it straight
We just curve
and
it.
stitching it down, you cut the curve and folded it under and stitched it down. Curved miters. That's wonderful. Awesome. Thank you. I'm sorry I forgot about that. Thank you very much. And then
I can't stand it. I gotta go there and watch.
it's awesome.
Oh,
Is that
we're going
awesome?
crazy back there. Just going crazy.
I know exactly what I'm going to be doing when I get next to a sewing machine again. This is
Man.
great.
All right. It's this awesome up close.
Vicki, tell us about this piece.
This piece is called Rhapsody in Pink. I love water lilies. They're one of my favorite flowers. And this is on the cover of my book.
Absolutely good.
Yes.
And you wanted to point out.
I wanted to point out that this has one of the faced backings on it. So you can see my faced binding on that, and you can see all the pretty scallops and curvy edges. I had so much fun with that.
That is great. A great way to finish off a quilt. And this quilt?
Okay, this quilt is so new, it doesn't even have a name or anything.
Oh,
This-
how lucky we are. It is hot.
Believe it or not, this is my version. This is Vicki's version of a log cabin.
Oh,
I
I don't
don't-
see a log cabin in there.
It's there. It's
It's
there.
a triangular
It's
log cabin.
a triangular, and it's
Wow.
totally improvisational.
Well, I know what your next book's going to be, huh?
Probably.
Man.
Oh, that's good. You got a head start there.
Okay.
Oh, look at the colors in this. They're just so vibrant.
This is Oriental Poppy, and this is entirely improvisational as well.
No pattern.
No pattern. The background is folded and wrinkled and crunched. I put little contrast strips to give it a little depth, and my poppy is just absolutely, totally dimensional.
I think Black Bart, our quilt police, would be very proud of you for breaking a lot of rules. And this piece, oh, look
This
at the
is
holes.
Summer's Bounty,
Summer's
Bounty.
Bounty. Wow.
complete with openings.
You know, Colorado's next to Kansas, and Kansas has sunflowers. So this would be a beautiful. But how do you do the holes? I'm sorry, just I have to know.
I'm loving
I have
this,
to know because
yeah.
we can't just walk away from that.
It's actually done very, very close to the first technique that I showed you, the basic technique. It's just that when you decide to put a hole in your quilt, you will cut out the Pellon stabilizer, and any of our seam allowances need to be around that opening. And then it's pretty much finished the same way.
Now, question, is that technique in the book? you
Yes,
got?
it is.
It is, so they can
Yes, it
learn
is.
that
They
from
can
your
learn
book.
this.
And
Wow.
once again, the name of the book.
Quilting by improvisation.
Love it. Love it. I'm glad I could come up and sneak on. Thank you, Ricky.
You're welcome. It's good. And we're going to be back after the break.
Yes, and Ricky has promised. You've promised. Well, something special. Don't go
I am,
anywhere.
from my heart.
Yeah. Welcome back to the show. It's my privilege to be partnered with Ricky Timms in our new endeavor. And one of the very best parts is that I get my own private concerts. And now he'll play for you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say the piece I'm going to play is actually inspired by the mountains that loom over this little town of La Vida. We call them the Huahatoya, and this is Huahatoya. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, you didn't disappoint. It was wonderful.
Thank you very much. It's one of my favorite pieces.
See, I thought you could only play the piano. I think I'm in for a lot of surprises, huh?
Absolutely terrific, Ricky.
Fabulous. Now, we got some questions during the break. The first one I want to ask is, where is Levita?
I guess I should answer that since I live in Levita, right? Levita is actually about 3 hours south of Denver. And so on the interstate, there's several towns, Denver, Colorado Springs, Pueblo, coming on down to Walsenburg and Trinidad. I mean, that's just kind of the map. But when you take a westernly turn at Walsenburg, 15 miles away, tucked into these mountains, is the little town, 924 year-round residents in Levita. We have 2 paved streets.
That's the truth.
That's
That is
right.
the truth. And I have to say, when I came here the first time, I'm thinking, where am I? And then as you start driving down here, it is spectacular. So you may be going to nowhere land, but it's a nowhere land that you want to stay
Absolutely. When you drove here today, how was it? How did it feel? Was it good?
at. Yeah.
It's an amazing little town.
Okay, we have some questions from the audience.
I'm standing here with Guy from Broomfield, Colorado. Guy, what's your question?
So, I want to know, how do I keep my wife from spending all our money on quilting?
Oh, I wonder what he spends all his money on.
First of all, I have to say thank you for being here today. I know you were drug along, and now here you're asking the question. I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I have a slight answer. You know what? Quilting is truly a passion. We're talking about inspiration and passion. And I said in the earlier segment, these pieces that are made are going to be remembered long after your loved one is gone. And so I say, let her spend all the money.
He doesn't like it. He doesn't like
It's hopeless anyway.
He doesn't like that answer.
And now we have Diane from Boulder, Colorado.
That's right. What I want to know is, where does a traditional quilt turn into a contemporary quilt or an art quilt? Where is that line?
Well, in my opinion, I think it comes when you start breaking the rules. And that's something that, especially when you're used to working with traditional, that you have to learn to do. You have to have the courage to do that because you're so used to following the rules. And I think when you start following your passion, putting your passion into it, breaking all the rules, I think that's when it becomes an art quilt. And it's also a great time to tackle those ideas you have deep inside that you want to work on, that you've always dreamed about.
Do you have any thoughts on that,
Well,
Ricky?
my question, my comment would be, there's a continuum as well. There's never really a delineation. There is this continuum that's in there, but I do think that if you're working as an artist, you're really working more original than you're working from patterns. You know,
Yes.
you're really kind of following your own passion. But I want everybody to do what they want to do, whether it's traditional or art or whatever it is in between. You just need to follow your passion and do what you want to do and call it whatever you want to call it.
And on that note, I'd like to say something. I've been quilting 28 years, and I've grown up as a quilter in the San Francisco Bay Area. And when I started quilting there was a very innovative group now, and was, called East Bay Heritage Quilters. It's the same group. And they're always cutting edge. And I have to say, I was very insecure about being a traditional quilter. I wanted so badly to be an art quilter, to be accepted among the fold. And I can remember one day I made a very classic traditional quilt, and it was hanging in Diana McClung and Laura Noun's quilt shop, Empty Spools, which is sadly no longer in existence. But Diana said to me, "Can I put that quilt in our first book?" It was Diana and Laura, and I said, absolutely. And that was a light bulb moment for me, because all of a sudden I was a traditional quilter and it was okay. So whether you find yourself in the category of traditional, contemporary, art, it doesn't matter, because as we discussed today, it's all from what's in here.
And it's all art. Ultimately, it's all art.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the difference is passion. When you put the passion in, whether it's traditional or art, it makes the difference.
Love it. So thank you, Vikki Pignatelli, for being here today.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Quilters
Absolutely.
Newsletter, for opening the doors.
Absolutely.
And thank you for wowing us once again, Ricky.
My pleasure.
And so you would like to say, as we say goodbye?
I would like to say it's a new day. Thank you so much.
Ricky, I got to tell you, the way you played the flute was just absolutely incredible.
Thank you very much.
And tell me the story behind that.
That particular piece, Wahatoya, was written 2 days after I met Raymond Redfeather and his wife, Chris, who live here in Levita and have wonderful sort of spiritual music. And I just fell in love with the flute. He told me the notes on the flute. 2 days later, I wrote a little melody, and that song was born, and it really became sort of the catalyst for that entire album.
And what's the name of the album?
The name of the album is Sacred Age, and that particular song was Wahatoya.
Love it.
Thanks.
And speaking of spiritual things, Vicki, I think that it's really important that we dig a little bit deeper than we did on the show. You really have a very spiritual background, and it's an all-encompassing spiritual background, I would say, from reading your book.
And I feel I always did have a spiritual background, but it really came to light, especially in my work. Right after my husband's cancer, he was diagnosed with kidney cancer, and it was a very scary time in our lives. And at the time, I had just started quilting, and my quilts were a little bit more on the traditional side. Right after his cancer, everything turned a 180 and went in the opposite direction. I had felt the need to make a healing quilt, and I wasn't sure how to do it. And I started to experiment, to play, trial and error, and it just all fell into place. And that was the turning point.
And isn't that amazing how something that could be so uncertain and horrible has been the thing that's made you?
All things have a good side and a bad side, and every bad thing has a silver lining as well.
I would like to know, I want to know a little more about your definition of spiritual quilt. I mean, what does that mean?
I've put myself into it. I've put my spirit, my creative spirit, my religious spirit, just into my work and into my passion. And it's sometimes when you do that, you just get lost in your work, and you can almost feel movement through to your hands. Your hands are what's doing this work from your inspiration.
Is it important for you that the people looking at that work feel that same thing?
It is, and it does make a difference, and it touches my heart. I think the greatest gift an artist can have is when they know that their work has touched the heart of another.
And you know what? We have one of our helpers around here, Jeff, who saw one of your works yesterday as we were setting up for this shoot, and he was absolutely blown away. You know, you touched him, and I think that that's what happens with different artists. We all do different things, and our work touches different people in different ways, and that's really great.
I love today's show. Thank you.
Thank you
It's been
so
fun.
much, Ellie.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you,
Love it.
Vicki.